Sometimes people look for animes to watch for less than respectable reasons. Now it's nothing to be ashamed about, but I'm sure that every one of us has had one of those phases where we look for either tits or gore in an anime. We've all been there. So what if we can find something that has both of these important criteria we're looking for? Wouldn't that be the best thing ever? Hello audience, today on Yvern's Box we'll be looking at the bloody and gory work known as Elfen Lied, a series that surprisingly doesn't have any elves. Elfen Lied was first written and illustrated by Lin Okamoto, the same man working on the current work Brynhildr in the Darkness, in the form of 12 volumes of manga, which would then be adapted by Studio Arms into an anime while being directed by Mamoru Kanbei, who also worked on works like Card Captor, Sakura, and Sound of the Sky. Elfen Lied has the two things all men ask for, so how good is it? Elfen Lied follows the story of a boy named Koda who finds a girl with horns sticking out of her head that had lost her memory. Because all she can say is new, he names her that. However, as the story progresses, readers and viewers discover that New is actually a Diclonius, beings with horns sticking out of their heads with telekinetic powers. We also find out that there's actually a large, giant organization that is searching for her. Although this isn't exactly an original setting with the big secret organization and all, I personally have that tinfoiled hat conspiracist part of me just begging to come out. However, this isn't really a story of how Koda and friends go to battle the evil bad guys, but felt more like a search to find out what relationship is there really between Koda and New. This experience starts off very brutally, with the first few minutes being some of the most bloodiest and goriest scenes I've ever seen. It grabs your attention quickly, whether you want it or not. But from then on, the story felt somewhat episodic, with very little progress forward into the story until later parts of the series. Once in a while you get a new threat, usually some super soldier or some other Diclonius that tries to hunt down the escaped New, with the rest of the time used to create additional background information for Koda and friends. However, the story does get wrapped up in a decent manner, with there actually being two different endings, one for the manga and one for the anime. In 2004, the anime adaptation for Elfen Lied was first shown to the world. However, it wasn't a one-for-one carbon copy of the manga because of mainly two reasons. Firstly, it isn't really possible to fit 12 volumes worth of content into a simple 13 episodes, and secondly, the manga was still in publication when the crew first started working on the anime. Because of this, some changes and modifications had to be made, but unlike many other anime adaptations that modify the plot, Elfen Lied was actually done pretty well. By eliminating some irrelevant or quote-unquote gravy, the anime could focus more on the comparatively more important elements of the story. And while some minor characters might have had their roles change, etc., overall the story stays on the right track. Additionally, the anime provides us with a second ending. While the manga's ending was darker and though maybe more artistic, the anime left an open-ended and arguably more positive ending, which I'm sure many people might prefer. Elfen Lied relies mainly on two characters, Koda and New, and while there are other characters, and those characters might even get a memorable scene or two, the story really comes down to the aforementioned two. Koda is a lot like many other typical male characters, while not really being any of those. He's interesting because he takes initiative all while knowing his limitations. He does have an interesting perk in the form of repressed traumatic memories that slowly gets revealed to the audience, and this makes him a slightly more interesting than other characters like him. New, on the other hand, is actually a character with a split personality, although Koda and friends don't actually realize this until very late in the story. While her original personality, Lucy, is a cold and deadly character, New is an upbeat and infantile character. This contrast makes for an interesting character, but that alone isn't enough to make her memorable. What does make her memorable, though, is the backstory segment that we discover. Although it really is just a flashback, it felt like so much more to flesh out these characters and make them memorable. However, the other characters are also somewhat interesting, exploring themes like what is fair, protecting the public from these superhumans by confining them, or possibly endangering the public by letting them go free and respecting their rights of freedom, etc. One's expectations should never really be too high when going into an anime made 10 years ago, but Elfen Lied is still pretty enough. It isn't anything too special, but it is also more than comfortable for anyone. The character designs are a little too moe for me, especially seeing what type of story it is, but it isn't enough to make me uncomfortable. The animation really isn't too much to praise, but it is decent. There really isn't much music, but the opening is splendid. Very few openings fully capture the theme or style of an anime, see Berserk, but Elfen Lied really matches with a song sung in Latin with beautiful accompanying art. However, there is one thing that sort of takes me, with that being the telekinetic powers or invisible hands of the Diclonius. And although I do understand the limitations of the technology back then, I personally wish it were done differently, even though I'm not quite sure how it could have been done differently. And while some people might have something to say about the excessive amount of blood and gore and nudity, I do agree to a certain extent, but at the same time, I feel it was what made Elfen Lied Elfen Lied. In fact, the first few minutes, the one that showed the bloodiest and goriest that the series has to offer, is what launched the series into infamy. Additionally, its constant use of these immature elements really show the darker undertones of the series, like social alienation, identity, prejudice, revenge, abuse, jealousy, regret, etc. And I mean, it's a dystopian universe, so what do you expect? Elfen Lied was truthfully a good watch the first time around, and not only for all the wrong reasons. It presented to us a dark and maybe even evil story with depressing characters that with its setting and plot is interesting enough. However, none of that makes it necessarily worth watching, and what I feel is that a better version of this story can be found in Okamoto's new work, Brynhildr in the Darkness, but Elfen Lied should be checked out, at least to say that you've experienced this. But you know what, for work that you go into expecting blood and tits, it really is pretty decent. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of Elfen Lied. I will be posting at least 2 videos a week, so stay tuned for more. But if you can, leave a comment or like, and maybe subscribe, because that really goes a long way to motivating me in making more content. Anyhow, thank you audience, this has been Yvern, and my box.